somewhere manufacturing was not, because maybe we were too sensitive to reform labor laws or to reform acquisition of land in a manner which gives quick opportunity for businesses to be able to establish. But the government's effort in the direction of ease of doing business, I'm sure, is slowly and gradually heading that way. And some of the recent discussion that have happened with the Ministry of Commerce, Trade, and other ministries, and even housing, even land has been an area of focus. And I'm hoping that our panelists will bring some interesting insight for all of us to benefit from. And maybe the takeaways of all this will actually be put together and will table to the government that how this nation can de-risk over dependence on the services sector and also add blue collar workforce created jobs through industrial and manufacturing, through land reforms, etc., etc. So with that, thank you very much. And I would like to hand it over to the moderator of our session. And I hope this would be a very, very interesting session indeed.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. And thanks everyone for joining in. As Sanjay, you've given a very good and a perfect briefing on the relevance of land in the scheme of things and how important it is for India to really acknowledge and identify the bottlenecks and the challenges which for the several years now have been plaguing the industry in terms of expansion, specifically on the manufacturing front, logistics, warehousing, data centers, and all these aspects coming in now. Because as we see it in terms of the dealing with the clients, while real estate historically, the focuses have been more on the commercial and the residential real estate. But be it any industry, the relevance of land remains the same as being a state subject. The underlying laws and the aspects which govern any relationship in terms of intra-authority dealings or any of these aspects would remain the same. So now with that background, we believe that land acquisition is one of the major challenges which has often led to project implementation challenges, delays in timelines, several litigations, cost aspects being with which most of the investors have often struggled. So, the discussion for the panel today is to identify and to understand in terms of how much have we really evolved, how much we have moved forward from where we were, did the Land Acquisition of 2000 Act of 2013 or any other, ordinances or circulars which the state governments often come out with, whether it has been of any benefit, real benefit to the industry in terms of minimizing the time which it takes to acquire a land parcel, or to, let's say, deal with the sealing and the conversion aspects which have been prevalent since the zamindari system, mostly to do with the reallocation of land, which, as we all know, in most of the states never happened. So most of these laws are archaic, urging to really undergo a massive makeover. So with this, I would like to put the question to Anuj. Anuj, in your experience, do you think that have we moved forward from where we were, let's say 2 decades back, in terms of land acquisition and the processes? Has the industry come along in terms of minimizing the risks and timelines pertaining to these aspects?
So Rahul, thank you very much for having me here, and it's a delight to be on your panel. Sanjay and I have worked together for many years, and I can tell you that he's absolutely an expert in land. Land for Sanjay was like a girlfriend. He was like so excited. And I don't know how many questions you're going to ask Sanjay, but I can tell you he's one of the finest brains in India on land, FSI, rules, history of land, 20 years, 30 years, what had happened with that land. Given that I have an advantage of having worked with him, I can tell you it'll be fantastic to get his knowledge as well on land.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rahul, I'll start with 2 or 3 things first. Have we moved? I'm sure, like everything else, we have moved forward. Have we moved forward at the pace that we would have wanted? Perhaps not. Rahul, you're from the legal fraternity. If you look at it, I got some data points. 25% of the cases in the Supreme Court pertain to land disputes. In the civil cases, 66% of it is related to land or property disputes. I'm like, wow. I mean, 25% of your Supreme Court matters are pertaining to land, 66% of your civil court matters are pertaining to property or land. So, clearly we've progressed, but perhaps not to the level that we would have wanted to. I mean, Sanjay in his opening remarks mentioned about the infrastructure and the road network. And I was looking at some of the other data that came in. There are nearly 435 infrastructure projects, which are the road projects under NHAI, which have got stuck because of the land dispute. One of the major reasons for in the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor has been this land acquisition. So, it is an extremely pertinent, point today for the investors, for the developers, for the manufacturing. And Sanjay alluded to that, manufacturing, warehousing, industrial. If we have to attract American or European manufacturing companies who are wanting to move base from China to India, then this is going to be a big subject from their perspective. And hence we will need to do, as we progress through this panel, perhaps come out with suggestions what the state and the central government will need to do on the land. But just to answer your question, yes, we progress, but not to the extent given where the court cases are and given the cases which are delaying the infrastructure projects for the government of India themselves.
No, that's a very valid point, Sanjay, Anuj, and I take that. What's also critical for all of us to really note is what are these factors. Let's say one aspect, very importantly, as you mentioned, has been litigation. Now litigations have been both in terms of the revenue land as well as the private land banks. But there's a lot to do with in terms of how the authorities have been forthcoming in dealing with these aspects in the first place. Which is the second half of the session, which we'll touch upon in terms of the record keeping. But essentially, to just move a step back to see in terms of the front end where the authorities could have aided in terms of land acquisition, largely given that each of these states has its own ceiling and conversion requirements. So I would like to, I believe the audience would like to understand that how easy has it been in terms of dealing with the departments on ceiling aspects and the conversion aspects which are relevant for use of this land for the purposes of your project?
So Rob, it has been pretty tough, barring some of the states, and one of them is Gujarat, where it has been made pretty easy. But if you were to go to many of the other states to do land acquisition, there are like some 69 different approvals that you have to take. And, as we go through this session, we'll probably compare with some of the international best practices, some of the practices which the more mature countries are being able to bring onto the land, and, what are the learnings that we will need to get in from there. My thought is, Rahul, that this is largely coming in from the fact that, we are an agrarian economy. And, we perhaps want to protect the farmer. We don't want that the farmer loses their cultivable land. And, a large industry comes in, and many years later, that industry sells the land and makes profit on that. And that is where I think the genesis of the problem really has started. And one will really need to look at it, perhaps because of, that aspect where we're trying to protect the farmer from some unscrupulous industrialist wanting to come and upsurge the land and make profit on that land. Perhaps the pendulum has gone too much the other way, and it needs to be brought in to be able to allow the industries to prosper. Otherwise, today it's becoming a big challenge for many of the industries to be able to grow, many of the infrastructure projects to be able to come through, and the least for the real estate community to be able to really fearlessly go and do projects and be able to invite the foreign investors in those projects.
Fair enough, Anuj. Point taken. Sanjay, if you were to comment on come into this aspect, while there has been a fair balance, and Anuj's point is very valid that we have to protect the agrarian economy and the farmers' interests are of supreme importance. But we've seen that even the farmers, if let's say both the investors and the farmers have made truce and they are willing to go ahead. But often projects get stuck because of all these bureaucratic challenges with each of the states having its own requirement. So with your background and having worked across sectors and with having substantial experience overseas, where do you see that India could do better in terms of having processes more streamlined akin to any of the Western countries to at least take care of roadblocks where we can address issues?
I think you have asked a very important question, and I think this can address all the problems that we are facing. And I'll tell you how I see it. I've seen it very closely. Every state has multiple departments, and one most important department is State Industrial Development Corporation. Maharashtra State Industrial Development Corporation is called MIDC, like that, Haryana, and Tamil Nadu, and Andhra, and etc. There, the mandate from the government is to invite investment, and therefore they roll out Vibrant Gujarat, New Maharashtra, different schemes, and they give you single window opportunity during those programs. And that's why so much of global interest happens around that time. Unfortunately, some of the other verticals, which are town planning, public works department, state electricity board, because electricity is very important aspect of industrialization, sustainable energy, the DISCOMs, all these other bodies are dispassionate about the objective of state government, which is basically promote investment, promote employment, and promote GDP of the state. So it was inherently left at the leadership. So if the political leader is very strong, that personality will bring everybody together, dictate, and provide that smoothless transition. And that's why the top 5 or 6 industrialized states of the country has remained so. Because that's where the leadership has evolved and they've seen the economic benefit of it. And that's why the growth is concentrated. That's why the migration is happening from other cities to these states. I believe the government has a solution of a very single nodal agency, which some states follow. Nodal agency should be fully empowered, should have overriding jurisdiction, and should be able to act and provide every other aspect of business under single window. That's one, clearly. Second is, most state governments have, over the years, have developed their direct, indirect employment incentives and therefore industrial incentive policies, which are very well refined. And if those can be paid attention to, I at one time observed that there were 2,000 applications pending for land allotment in every state industrial development corporation in India. So imagine the amount of industrial activity which is stalled. The third benefit, which I think is possible, which I was quite encouraged to see Karnataka government do it, Maharashtra government do it, is the two parties, let's say a farmer and an industrialist, can sign an agreement, go to the State Industrial Development Corporation and surrender the land and get it reallotted from the state. What that does, it sanitizes the land title. It stops the recourse of farmer industrialist litigation, and we get the government in between. Because at any point of time, and the moment the land goes to the government, it becomes leasehold. So at certain stage, whether it's 99 years or 65 years, perpetual lease or whatever, at certain stage it ends. Like Taj Mahal Singh Hotel, it got rebid.
Right.
That will substantially help overcome some of these very important points that Anuj also mentioned, the underlying concerns of industrialists taking advantage of farmers that can be easily mitigated by bringing state insight. And the state will therefore, if will be able to provide the necessary infrastructure, because I can tell you, you can buy land anywhere in the country. If there is no sewage, water, electricity, highway connectivity, logistics, all the critical backbones and demographics provided, it will fail, or it will require an enormous effort. For example, Tata Steel did in Jamshedpur. It was a massive, I mean, it went to such a scale that they themselves formed a jurisdiction for the whole township.
Right.
I think some of these ideas which come to my mind, and I'm sure some of you would also share, which can really eliminate this aspect.
No, thanks, Sanjay. That's very insightful. I would like to hear Mr. Balaji's view on this. Mr. Balaji, with your experience, what do you think is the interplay as far as expediting the land acquisition processes is concerned, and how best can a private investor look at it? Maybe the profile may be big or small, but till the time the laws are inherently not amended, the processes are not streamlined, how should an investor approach in the given context with any such projects to ensure a timely completion of projects?
Thank you, Rahul. I think the question of land acquisition and financing for development is a virtual minefield. So the chances that you will get blown up in that minefield are far higher than you will be able to escape unharmed from there. The reason is, as you might be well aware as a legal person, the urban land ceiling and the fragmentation of land holdings has created such a sort of a labyrinth of holdings, and there's no digitization of records, which you say you will discuss later. But the ownership, the title, the zoning, it is a complete nightmare for us to navigate most of the time. And I agree with Sanjay and Anuj when they say some of the more advanced and developed states have done much better. So when I have done projects in Maharashtra and Karnataka, they were relatively far more easier than when I had done projects in other states. But having said that, it is still quite a laborious, time-consuming process. It's not easy to acquire land because you do need the help of land aggregators who put together all these fragmented pieces, who try to assure you of ownership. Sometimes when you do your due diligence, you realize that it is not as clean and as clear as they have assured us. And then comes all the revenue officials you need to deal with. And then comes the urban development and the town planning authorities to deal with the zoning. So by the time you go through all this, it's quite a few years. And that is why I think the profit margins are unusually and exorbitantly high in the land play in India. And the developer gets squeezed in this whole thing. And it's only the land person who makes a lot of money because he knows the house-wise ways of doing it. And that is not a very healthy practice. And this practice can be streamlined when more and more digitization and online applications, online verifications, online validations are all there. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but we need to hasten it up if we want to really be an industrial nation. And I think we will be looking at more and more online support and e-support in the future for land, and not just depend upon the age-old documents and records and people to tell you and assure you, which is what we do nowadays. So I think we need to do a lot more cleaning up of the documents and the titles. We need to clean up a lot of the whole zoning and the approval process so that it's all transparent, and reduce these so-called profit margins on land. Because, unlike what most people think, land is never in shortage. If you really do a back of the envelope calculation also, the whole of the country's population of 1.3 billion people, if I give them single family homes, I can still do it in 3 to 4% of India's land mass. So there's really no shortage of land. The problem is the shortage of infrastructure. And when you have a shortage of infrastructure, just like Sanjay said, land without infrastructure is absolutely of no use to anyone, either for residential or industrial or commercial or anything. So the whole idea is not so much of the shortage of land, but a sort of a careful, coordinated planning in order to ensure that the right places are infrastructure, the right sort of procedures are followed, so that we can have much more of planned development. That's the way I look at it.
That's very helpful, Mr. Balaji. And as you rightly put, I think there's no shortage of land and infrastructure, and all of it needs to go hand in glove to really ensure that there's a proper allocation and a planned development, so as not to have the prices being very high in a particular area and just 5 kilometers away being one third of it. Which has been the disparity in the industry, which is largely attributed to clusterization of the lands as well as the infrastructure not being very planned and being selectively controlled. I would like to call in Anurag here. Anurag, Anurag, you're from the industry and setting up projects across states. What's your take in terms of your practical experience being from a city gas infrastructure business on setting up these projects?
Hello, thanks for inviting me. Basically, what all I'm just trying to crux it out. What all I have just heard from Balaji, Sanjay, and Anuj, that it is the common take, which what all we are talking. These issues are long pending. So our own experience, with our own experience in the industry, as well as from my past experience as well on ground, we have been facing these issues like of litigation between the government and the farmers. Then the zoning regulations, then the regulation, then the assimilation of different authorities who are working all over across for a project implementation. So these, and then land records, of course, understanding and taking out of these land records, again, a bigger exercise, which Balaji has rightly pointed out. So we have been facing these issues on ground, and these are very common in all these states. But I will just add one thing to this, that what it feels actually now on ground, that since my very recent past experiences in land, to some of the states which used to be very difficult on part, but there are certain corrections and amendments which have been done in the process part, and actually it helps in getting the land uh, in a more conducive manner. So with my recent experience in Punjab as well as in UP, in fact, I must be amazed to see that the process was quite streamlined than what we expected. So, but still, there is a long way to go, and of course, one thing which I actually take from Sanjay's point of view, that all the authorities has to be come on the single podium for addressing the issues, like the zoning regulations as well as the revenue authorities. They have to come together to help the investor and the stakeholders who are trying to invest in any given state, because that actually takes a lot of time and energy from us while we are on ground. So my very the experiences, although it's a mixed experience, but of course we may see things coming in a better manner in the recent past, which we are experiencing on ground.
So that's very relevant, Anurag. And in fact, as you rightly mentioned, also from Sanjay's comments, one thing we note is the concept of single window clearances, or the different options which the states have in the past come up with in terms of whether it is Invest Gujarat, Invest Punjab, or any of the likes of the investor summits. How beneficial have they been, or how relevant have they been in terms of post the summit? Any actions which have been assured on the ease of obtaining approvals, or the access to the systems for getting the approvals. I would like to hear Mr. Venkatesh if you have any views on this.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Rahul. This is Venkatesh Hegde from State Bank of India. Uh,
Yeah.
as you know, land is the most important security for any of our loaning, whether it is commercial loans or it's home loan or whether it's builder finance. So many a times we face impediments when we go to create a security. So if it is a digitized land and if the approvals come in faster, giving builder finance becomes easier. So does giving individual home loans become easier. Nowadays, the maximum time taken in getting a builder type approved or a facility approved becomes difficult because we have to take land records of 30 years, and 30 years land records in many of the states it's very difficult to find, whereas in individual loan cases we take 13 years record, and then comes the approval. As you rightly said, if there is a single point approval, then waiting for various approvals is not required, and we will find it easier to get all these things done. From bank's point of view, we are moving on fast to digital model and digital access. There is something called EASE 3.0, which means enhanced access and service excellence, which requires us to do most of the things in on digital model. And in this COVID days, most of our clients would also would like to come on virtually and visit our bank sites to get their loans, whether it is a commercial loan or whether it is an individual loan. So what we have seen recently, many of our builders have gone on to virtual modes for booking their flats as well as getting the loans approved by having a patch there on their website. But when it comes to land records, when it comes to approval, it becomes very difficult.
But how would you, Venkatesh, how would you address the challenge where a genuine investor has been struggling with the bureaucracy in terms of
So,
the delays on getting the approvals, wherein the lending requirements are stuck or have a condition to disbursement as one of the approvals, which really the investors cannot control, or they have done whatever was within their reach. How do you think, what would be the lender's perspective in such sort of scenarios?
no, we have been trying to ease out the things by collaborating with the associations like builders associations, and we are also in touch with RERA, who help us in getting all these things done. But lot needs to be still done. That's what I feel.
Fair enough, Venkatesh. I think there's some network issue.
Yeah,
Uh,
sorry, there was some network issue in between. Yeah.
yeah,
So
no
we are
worries.
collaborating with various associations, and we are also taking it up with government, because we have a committee meeting which happen, and state level bankers committee meetings happen. We take up these issues, and wherever possible, we try to ease out these problems.
That's very valid, Venkatesh, and it brings us to the end of the first question for our discussion today in terms of the challenges from different perspective in terms of land acquisition, which we all acknowledge that have been existing, but how essentially these are to be addressed. A lot of support is essentially needed from the government authorities in streamlining these processes, given that most of these processes are controlled by the states. I believe that just my two bits on it. I believe the center would need to step in here and sort of streamline processes for the states to follow, similar to what it has done previously in the other regulated sector, whether it's electricity or any of the other sectors, just to ensure that the overall objective of India's commitment to industrial growth is achieved. And processes are more streamlined. There is no sort of difference in terms of pre or post acquisition approvals plaguing any of the implementation challenges or financing requirements or disbursement. But as we all acknowledged, I think we'll move to the second question for today, which is a very important aspect we touched upon, in terms of which is a subset to the land acquisition, and is largely to do with how the land records have been maintained in our country. While we all have moved towards digitization, 2008, the government has taken incentives and a lot has been done. I would call in Sanjay here to just give his views on how do you see that the land record digitization is really going to make a difference? Do you think that just by computerization of what was being done manually really solves the problem, which is to do with the subset of land acquisition, largely to do with the title?
Extremely helpful. I believe there are many stages of land which record keeping plays an important role. So let's leave aside the title. So the title from Nizams in Hyderabad would be questionable. But let's say if the title is clear and but has gone through various hands, and for some region, Saat Bara or mutation in the government records has not happened. And that would leads to complications because you have to go back in history and do a due diligence. And you heard a very common expression amongst lawyers who are the biggest beneficiary of this lapses in the system.
No, not at all.
We'll do a 30-year search. We'll do a 60-year search. The reason they do that is because they know that unless they do that, they would not know where the land came from. Second, there is a myth that if you come out with a public advertisement, a notice, you have basically invited the world to object to me buying the land. Since you have not objected, my land title is good. In reality, that is not the case. Any lawyer will tell you that even after you're publicly advertised and nobody objected, you purchase the land, 5 years down the road, when you have built a massive plant, a farmer walks in with very clear documents establishing his ownership, his or her ownership, can put the plant at jeopardy. And the millions of investment and billions of investment can come to a standstill. So digitization will help enable due diligence faster. And that will compress the acquisition cycle enormously. And also it will eliminate any chances of fraud or fudging or, unfortunately in many states we have a lot of creative people in this country, as you know, and they've used their skills excessively to deliver solutions on the ground, which often are discovered in case studies, but I will not go that path. The other part is, I think, if you start using satellite imagery, which is now very common, and even private enterprises are doing, and you do satellite imagery with tagging built in. You have a facial recognition technology now, being used for many other recognitions as well. So there are now various technology tools available which can give you remote access to your due diligence. So somebody sitting in Singapore can actually go to the government website, type on the survey numbers, identify a Google image or perhaps government satellite image, and know the title. It will compress that cycle. So it is a huge benefit in my opinion. There was another point, Rahul, I wanted to go back earlier.
Yes.
You know why IT companies succeeded in India?
Yes.
25 years ago? Because government of India had set up software technology parks. And the government had set up NESCOM. These two initiatives, which has led to $100 billion industry and growing, and responsible for urbanization in India. If the central government can set up Land Park Limited, and instead of special economic zones which were created under the previous government for industrial, which were normally led by private enterprises.
Right.
Most of those private enterprises were replaced by central government enterprises. So central government takes the land from the state on a gets the title, sets up the infrastructure, and rolls out single window, 30-day by the watch allotment and setting up of manufacturing unit. So that's one way government can look at a solution, and it may start only with few states and perhaps later they can roll out elsewhere. And they can also do studies which are required to be done, because we know if you need to set up a ceramic manufacturing plant, for that you need 100 degrees Celsius, which can be cheaply fueled by gas, which is available in Gujarat and Haryana. So you can actually do a deeper study and bring a industrial landscape, just like zoning, commercial, residential in the city. Imagine if you do sector zoning and invite global corporations to set up those sectors in these states on the basis of skills, etc., etc. So central government can play a very big role through these, some of the ideas that I think are practical to implement, although requires a political will. Otherwise, state governments have to lead the way.
Right. No, that's very valid, Sanjay. And while the government has been taking a lot of initiatives on this front, and there have been land banks and parks being made available for setting up of industrial unit, often the challenges pertaining to industries where the land requirements being more than a certain degree of size, let's say running into a few 500 acres or 1,000 acres. They may still have to look at private land bank acquisitions, which has been the case for a fair bit of the industries, energy for that matter, being the land status would be that of industrial. So essentially,
Rahul, by the way, sorry to interrupt, Rahul. The Airport Authority of India normally takes 5 to 10,000 acres. And privatization airport across is about over 35, 40 airports in the country, may eventually be 100. So that central body has done that very successfully, whether private or government. So it is something which they're already doing,
Yeah. So that's where precisely it has been happening, but still with to match it up with the growing pace of the industry, whether there is a sort of the availability which the investors are looking at. I would just like to call in Anuj here to share his views. If you believe that the central government should be moving forward in terms of initiatives on setting up of the parks, and how beneficial it would be, and could there be a possibility of ruling out the private land acquisition business going forward in altogether, or some sort of streamlining the processes so the interface can be reduced?
So Rahul, it's interesting what the discussion has been going on, and one common thread is coming out is that there needs to be more that needs to be done. I like what Sanjay said, is the way that software parks came up. Is there a way that we can put in that path as well? I think certainly it'll help. It'll help. But before we go there, Rahul, there are a number of steps that need to be done. If you look at it, in terms of our ranking, we're 154th in ease of property registrations. Sanjay said is that a lot of the legal fraternity makes a huge amount of living from there. But the honest answer to that is, if you're 154th, then there is a huge amount of work that needs to be done. Smaller countries like Qatar and Rwanda and New Zealand, they are up there. If you look at China, it's 28th. So what can we do initially just to bring that 154th to come into the 20s range? I think it's exactly the point that you started with. It is digitization. Just let's get the digitization done well. I think there are 5 or 6 states, Tamil Nadu, Jharkhand, Telangana, Karnataka, who have been able to do 99% digitization. Once that happens, Rahul, then I have a proposition. I have a proposition which is actually called as Torrens. Torrens is a way that the Australian system brought in investment in land. And it's also a system with many countries, including UK, Ireland, Singapore, Canada, Malaysia have followed the same Torrens system. What Torrens really says is that the state will provide you the guarantee once we have digitized it for all property related matters. And once you do that in your digital records, you have actually put in who the actual owner is at that time, then you should provide that. as a state guarantee. You're taking money at the time of the registration. Use that money effectively to be able to provide a state guarantee. And it's not unique that I'm saying is for India. It is all these mature countries have that system, which is state government provided guarantee for the ownership of that land. To my mind, that's a big pass. That's a big welcome change for the institutional overseas investor if we have to attract them. For the various manufacturers that we are saying is we want you to come to India and outsource your manufacturing facilities into India. I think that sort of a system, if we are able to bring in, to my mind, it will be a big change.
That's very helpful, Anuj, and that is something which possibly could be done. But do you think that with the way the Indian government has placed and the expenditures which we have lined up for sectors where the want of funds is more, is what you're suggesting is a sort of a title insurance where the government were to underwrite any issues stemming out of the title risk? But do you think that essentially, given that the government is doing that with the revenue land parcels, but with the private land parcels, which contribute the major part of what a majority of investors are forced to acquire or do not have a choice if they want to do business in India. So do you think that the government would have the wherewithal or the funds to really underwrite that?
Very good point, Rahul. I don't think so. We should be boiling the ocean straight away in India. My guess is, it'll be one of the progressive states who will pick it up and who will do a small part of it to begin with. They may only do it for the manufacturing facilities who are coming in to set up their base in India, and to then they will start to do it. So it'll be a case study by a progressive state government who are going to do it. I don't think you're absolutely right. I don't think so. The center will be able to direct it. There are other priorities for them, but it will be one of the states that is going to pick it up and say, we're going to give this torrent assurance to the international community who are wanting to set it up, and it's a state government guaranteed title to them. In a way, Sanjay, like you said, is STPI or MIDC land. I mean, that is exactly what it is, a state backed guarantee insurance to the title. I'm saying is it needs to be a little bit more wider, including the private guys where you have digitized their records.
Yeah, because Anuj, at times the land allotment processes may stretch into a domain where your opportunity cost may be at play. So you may not want to really go the revenue land allotment route and rather acquire land yourself. I'll just call in Mr. Balaji here to share his views in terms of what does he think about this aspect and how best it could be done.
No, I agree with Sanjay and Anuj. You see, the digitization is the root of it, as I was saying. And I don't think it's a very expensive one because you have the land records and it needs to be digitized. And as you're well aware that today when we pay stamp duty and registrations at all the SRO offices and the revenue is collected by the government, it is quite high. It's one of the highest in the world. And for that, we don't get an absolute right. That is the very sad thing because it's not an absolute right you get even if you have registered a document. And there is no title insurance in this country. So for all practical purposes, there's always this sword hanging over your head, especially for the person who buys it, for the person who's manufacturing it, for the person who's funded it, keeping that as a collateral. So I think all over, you will solve the issue if for whatever reason you have a digitized ownership record. And the same is what when the registrar's office is saying, fine, this is the guy who's on the record and you're buying it from him. Otherwise that whole registration and stamp duty process, it just becomes a little bit of a sham, if I can say so, because you're not getting an absolute right just because you've registered the document. It doesn't mean anything. The ownership is still disputed and there's no insurance company is willing to give you a title insurance. So when the projects are massive and when you have to do huge funding, I think this is going to be a big sort of a detriment and speed breaker. So whoever has to bite the bullet, I think we have to bite the bullet and ensure that the root of all this industrialization or all development, which is land, has to have its foundation in a good title. And the government standing witness or ensuring or guaranteeing it. And that is why the rush towards MIDC or STPI or anything or KIADB, because we feel, okay, there I don't have to worry about the title, even if I'm getting a 60-year lease or a 90-year lease. And that's why BKC is so popular and so much in demand, because MMRDA says, okay, fine, I give you a 60-year lease. Also, I'll say it's okay. If 80-year lease, I say okay. Because at least I know I don't have to think about the ownership. And as the land value becomes higher and higher, this would become even more critical. So I am absolutely clear that somebody has to bite the bullet, the government, and we have to start this journey sooner than later if we really want to go somewhere.
That's interesting, Venkatesh. And then in terms of Mr. Balaji, how the government may really respond to any such propositions and how beneficial it may really turn out to be is something which the waters are to be tested yet. But I would like to ask Anurag here. Anurag, in your experience, do you believe digitization of the records per se, or the processes behind it in terms of how the digitization is being done, or the ground level processes to actually factor in the correct names? In your experience, have they been helpful? Because varying from states, across states, from Punjab, Haryana, MP, UP, Telangana, there have been different practices in terms of how and when the records are really updated. So what's been your experience in terms of any such record reviews?
So I will just take a step back before answering your question. So the question to myself is actually there are two processes. One is acquisition of land by the government and the land provided by the government. So in that case, we are all known that the digitization is not of any help to us. But of course, for private acquisitions and for purchase of land for projects, we do need to go for seeing the land records and digitization of records. But now, what we are looking for actually, the title of land uh, on or the land dispute cannot be of real help if we look at digitization as a process. So my take basically that whatever processes we are following right now, and in all these states where we are working in, and whatever process we are dealing with the authorities. The only thing which we have faced, although the records are digitized and everything is there, but there are gaps, there are loops in between, and that need to be connected. So when we go for a diligence of say 13 years or say 30 years of the records, then there are gaps which need to be addressed at the ground level. So before this process, addressing this process of digitization, my take is to educate the people who are on ground in the department, within the department, to to give a basically a broader perspective of what a country is looking and what the country's stake is from the revenue authorities, and what we are trying to approach, what we are trying to gain out of this. Because there is a normal apathy of all the government authorities who are sitting on ground to the digitalization of records, and that is one of the very holding thing where when we approach department or revenue department basically for seeking the records. So until and unless we address these ground issues which are actually related to the people who are on ground, the digitalization process, I don't think it will be very helpful in the broader perspective. So I was just it's my very personal take that before we address the digitalization, we need to address the proposition of record which are available on ground with the departments, which are actually not very clear when we go and approach and we try to find out. And after we have this physical record out clear, the digitization can be of help or to an extent. Because and there is one more thing, that the willingness of these states who which are working in for digitization has to be very clear. The states like Bihar, or for that matter UP, or for that matter MP, to some extent are now start doing that process on a broader level when they are facing this the government change and everything. But from the prior experiences, these things were not there for last, let's say, 10 years. So there has to be basically a simulation of all this when we talk about digitization as a process to be completed.
Fair
And of
enough.
course, the centralization of what the idea behind everything is the centralization of record. That's quite important. Actually, sometime I can take an example of the land resource department, which is, I believe, it is there since 2008 by the central government. But it is non-functional. If you read the statement and object of that department, it talks about everything what we are actually trying to address in land matters. But I don't feel that any of those objectives are equally handled or well handled by that department, although that's working since 2008. So again, the willingness of the government and people who are there sitting as the policy framers has to understand the gaps in between the people who are making this process and people who are sitting on ground. There has to be an assimilation between.
That's very valid point, Anurag. To educate the people on ground and the willingness of the government all has to work hand in hand to really have a more spread out industrialization across states happening. While we know that some of the states till date are struggling in terms of attracting those industries because of these factors. I would like to just quickly, we are running out of time. We would like to call Mr. Venkatesh to just pick his views in terms of from bank's perspective. Does he find this as a challenge, or this is something only the investors are really struggling with? Does he see that this is a roadblock to the financing aspects as well?
Yeah, Mr. Rahul, am I audible?
Yes, please.
Yeah. As we see it, it's a big hurdle because if a lot of dependency is now there on the records, and finding out and seeing whether the title is clear takes a lot of our time, and we have to depend on the external agencies. So if digitization happens, it will go a long way in expediting our processes and doing the validations and verifications faster. So we are looking out to such kind of technology to come in faster, because it has to be in sync with the world norms. In other countries, we have title insurance, which gives us comfort, and then private party or government takes up the risk of title not being clear. But that kind of comfort is not there in India, and that's the reason we need the title of the primary or the collateral to be absolutely clear. So digitization would go a long way in making finances available faster, and also at a cheaper risk, because the risk factor or risk premium which we attach in such case of lands can be reduced, because if we have the comfort that everything has been properly checked and is good.
That's very helpful, Venkatesh. Your views really appreciated, and I think that brings us to the end of the session. But it's been a very informative session, and I would like to thank all the panelists for their views on this particular subject. A couple of key takeaways, just to sum it up, would be the sort of next steps or the representations which we as industry stakeholders across different verticals should be looking at making to the government in terms of streamlining of the processes, largely involving, as Sanjay mentioned, the satellite imagery and the setting up of STP or NASCOM-like bodies in terms of controlling the land, which Anuj, you mentioned too, and digitization being an important aspect which we all acknowledge. What's more relevant here is to control the process of digitization and how best the authorities are educated, so digitization does not lead to another challenge or another Pandora's box opening up in terms of the process not being correctly carried out, which as lawyers we can tell you that is a practical reality. We see that the people on ground, being patwaris or talatis or the ground level people, revenue officers, they are very interested in actually correcting the title, or maybe carrying out the due processes as per the Indian Succession Act or the other legislations in terms of capturing of the records correctly. So which may lead to another set of issues opening up. But I believe that most of the states will have to come in together here to manage this process, so that the outcome which the industry is looking at can be achieved. I'll hand over the session to Neerja here to bring in the last few bits, please.
No, thank you very much, Rahul. This was a great session, excellent deliberations, no hold knowledge sharing. And of course, I'm very confident the participants have benefited from the deliberations. Briefly summing up by you and kind of brings into a logical conclusion that land is important and there are various methodologies by which government and the private sector are looking to resolve an issue which needs to be handled very well. Thank you once again, all the delegates and the speakers for coming on board with us. Much appreciate. Until we meet again. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sanjay.
Thank you.